So our second step for this week looks at the early Reagan administration, especially over the issue of oops, don't want that. Over the issue of race. And Reagan is elected in 1980 overwhelmingly. Former governor of California, pretty moderate in a lot of ways as governor of California, but moves to the right after he leaves office in 74. 1980 campaigns, you can see the platform here on strong leadership in an era where American power seemed to be declining, however you measured it, in terms of economic policy, in terms of foreign policy. There seemed to be social dislocation, crime. Reagan also makes clear that he will be more respective of the traditional rights of states, even in in areas where state power had been sacrificed in the name of civil rights. And this is a brief excerpt. The audio for this isn't great. It's a good reminder. I mean, this is 40 years ago. This is Reagan at the Neshoba County Fair in Mississippi. And there's no video of this appearance. I mean, now there'd be 9,000 videos, but the message here, and put yourself in the position, imagine you're a rural white Southerner receiving this. What you're hearing from Reagan is this idea that I'm going to be more sympathetic to your concerns than either Democrats or Republicans have been over the previous 20 years.
I believe in states' rights. I believe in people doing as much as they can for themselves at the community level and the private level. And I believe that we've distorted the balance of our government today by giving powers that were never intended in the Constitution to that federal establishment. And if I do get the job I'm looking for, trying to reorder those priorities and to restore to the states and local communities those functions which properly belong there. I'm going to try also.
So this message is heard. Reagan carries every southern state except for Georgia. Gets very, very strong showing in rural white southern areas in particular. So the idea is that Reagan is going to shift on these issues. There are, though, other ideological influences in Reagan's approach to legal and constitutional affairs. The Cato Institute, which is a strongly libertarian institute, the Federalist Society is still around, major player in conservative circles, argues for more conservative appointees to the federal judiciary. And unlike the kind of populism, right-wing populism we saw from this Reagan speech in Mississippi, these are sort of high-minded conservative intellectuals that are arguing that the administration should use both the courts and administrative regulatory bodies to shift policy in a more conservative direction. Now, ironically, this doesn't apply, at least initially, to Supreme Court confirmations. Gerald Ford gets one nomination. He nominates a very moderate Republican named John Paul Stevens, who will wind up being the most liberal member of the court by the time he's elected. By the time he retires in 2010. Jimmy Carter does not get any Supreme Court nomination, so he's the only president of the post-World War II period who gets no Supreme Court confirmations. And then Reagan, during the campaign, had promised that his first Supreme Court nomination would be a woman, and he nominates Sandra Day O'Connor, a pretty mainstream conservative, a former politician in Arizona. So despite these ideas of a more conservative approach to judicial affairs that are percolating within conservative thoughts, in the mid 70s through the early 80s, the idea is towards still more moderate conservative nominees. Now, one other thing about the we see in the courts, so we have Reagan sort of emphasizing the idea of race, but race plays unusual. It sort of manifests itself in unusual ways in the courts in the mid 1980s. So there's this case that I have excerpted here called Thornburg versus Ginglas. This is a redistricting case. And essentially, I'll oversimplify because some of this is a little dense, but essentially what happens is an alliance throughout the South between white Republicans and Black Democrats who argue that the best way to to implement the Voting Rights Act is to create congressional districts in which there is either a majority or a near majority of minority voters, on grounds that only such districts would be likely to elect a minority to Congress, which fits the basic ideas of the Voting Rights Act. And Thornburg outlines these as the Supreme Court largely blesses this approach, and Thornburg outlines these three tests that, and these are most, these are national decisions, but they essentially apply almost entirely to the South, in which districts need to be drawn. And this movement is called a movement for majority minority districts, and it creates, it has an immediate impact. So you get far more minority members elected to the House. This is a comparison between 1982, so it's predating this, and then 2012. All of the blue dots on these maps are African American members of Congress. You see lots more African Americans from the South in 2012. The yellow dots are Hispanic members of Congress. You look at just the surge of Hispanic members of Congress in California, but also in Texas and in Florida. And then Asian Americans who had only been elected in Hawaii in 1982 suddenly see more Asian Americans in New York City, in Washington State, in California as well. And these trends have continued over time. But the effect of this is to remove, especially in the South, black voters who are overwhelmingly Democratic voters in the South, around 95%. If packing them into a single district results in what's called bleaching of the other districts, making them whiter, which at this point is more conservative. And the result is that white Democrats are the ones who lose out. You get more black Democrats, you get more white Republicans who are elected in the South, but fewer white Democrats. And you can get a sense of the reason for this in these two maps. So on the left is a congressional district in Louisiana. On the right is a congressional district in North Carolina. There are portions of this district, District 12, where the district is essentially a highway, and it's linking various African-American neighborhoods from Durham to Charlotte. This one is linking various African-American neighborhoods from Shreveport in far northwestern Louisiana to Baton Rouge, the state capital. These kinds of sort of stringy districts, eventually the Supreme Court will issue a ruling called Shaw versus Reno, where they say this is going too far. But in the 80s, these kinds of districts seem to be encouraged by Supreme Court rulings. So you get, again, more black congressmen. So these districts would be 70, 75, 80% African American, but the surrounding districts are going to be much whiter. And at this point, that means more conservative. So you get a situation like this incredible transformation in Georgia. The map on the left are Georgia House districts in 1990. There's only one Republican in the state. In 1994, you see a whole slew of Republicans who are elected. A few of these remaining districts are black Democrats, and then there are two white Democrats. That's all that's left. In 1990, Georgia had one African-American member of Congress, John Lewis, and all of these other seats are white Democrats. So this is, critics would argue this is a kind of cynical way of pushing the idea of Voting Rights Act, but the Supreme Court basically saying that congressional districts need to be drawn in such a way to maximize the chances for a minority candidate to be elected under the Voting Rights Act has this intriguing political effect with regards to how southern states in particular play out. And that's our second snippet.